Hello and welcome to the Friday episode of the 1 Week of Scratch Beginner Series. In this episode, we don't have any code in KitKat. In this episode, we're going to learn how to make sprites and what sprites are. Currently, we have KitKat who's in the middle of his little room. You can click and drag him around, but that's pretty much it. KitKat is what is known as a sprite. A sprite is an object in Scratch. KitKat is currently an object in this room. If we want to add another object to this room, we would add it as a new sprite. To do this, you're going to hover over this button that says choose a sprite and has a little symbol with a cat and a plus on above it. Now you'll see a couple options. We can either choose a sprite, paint a sprite, surprise, like make Scratch surprise us, or we can upload a sprite. I'm going to explain what each of these buttons does. If we click the choose a sprite button, it'll let us choose a sprite that Scratch has already made for us. There are many of these. If we click the paint button, it will open up a sprite within the costumes tab automatically, and we can paint or we can create our own sprite using the skills we learned yesterday. If we click the paint option, it will open up a new sprite and it will open it up with a blank costume automatically, and we can use the skills we learned in yesterday's episode about using the costume editor to make our sprite look like whatever we want. If you click the surprise button, Scratch will choose a sprite for us, but Scratch will do this from its own library. Lastly, if we click the upload sprite button, we can upload an image from our computer. For now, we're only going to worry about the choose a sprite button. So I'm just going to click it, and now it'll bring me to this menu. In this menu, there are many sprites. Now, as you can see, if I hover my mouse over a sprite, it might change costumes. That's because many of the sprites in this menu come with many costumes. So if I click the bat sprite, it would put in a sprite that looks like one of these bat costumes, and it would have 3 different costumes in it already. If I chose the batter sprite, it would have one of the costumes that it's showing right now, but it would also have about 4 or 5 other costumes in it. You can choose a sprite from anywhere in this menu, and they have some pretty funny sprites and some pretty cool sprites. There's one sprite where it's a catcher for baseball. There's a centaur. There's cheesy puffs. There's a dinosaur, and more. Something to keep in mind is that this is the same menu that you'll see when you try to add a costume. For now, we're going to add this little dinosaur, this dancing dinosaur. He's a nice dinosaur, by the way. So I hover over him with my mouse and I click him, and there we go. Now, he's not moving like he did in the sprite menu, but if we go into his costumes, you'll see he has many different costumes. Now, if I wanted, I could animate him by doing this. And you don't need to do this. In fact, I would recommend you don't do this, not for any particular reason, but it's a little difficult. By putting this symbol code here, now this little dinosaur will constantly be animated and switching costumes. Because we imported a sprite that has multiple costumes, we'll have these costumes automatically. As you can see, this dinosaur has been imported as a separate object in this Scratch menu. I can click and drag around the dinosaur, and it doesn't affect KitKat at all. Each sprite is just an object in the Scratch editor. Now the sprites have different properties like the X and Y coordinates, which we'll get into in the intermediate series, the direction, which we'll also get into in the intermediate series, the size, 100 is the normal size, and the show and the sprite name. The sprite name will not appear in Scratch unless you set it to. But it can be useful because if you have many sprites, having a sprite name will allow you to easily know which sprite is which when you're referring to them in your code, which once again we'll get into in the intermediate series. The show and hide portion of a sprite just says whether it's invisible or visible. Each one of these parts of the sprite is called a property. Now let's say we want to add 3 sprites, or we want to have 3 sprites. What we can do is we can hover over the sprite button again, but I don't want to have to choose a sprite. Let's have Scratch put in a random sprite for us. The way we would do this is by clicking the surprise button. So I click this button, and Scratch chose this Max sprite. So now I'll quickly import this code, and now Max is doing the same thing that the dinosaur is, which is constantly being animated. Now the way to make the simple script to make any sprite be constantly switching through its costumes like this, which animates it, is to grab a when green flag clicks block and then a forever block and attach the 2. Then put a wait 1 seconds block from the control section and replace the 1 with 0.1. Finally, grab a next costume block from the look section and put it underneath. Now this is a little complicated and I wouldn't recommend, you could try this at home, but I'm not going to go over it in detail in this video. Now I have an image on my computer that I would like to upload. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the upload sprite option. Now as you can see, I have many different screenshots and images, and I'm just going to choose from one of these. I'm going to go with my image of bacon, because I like bacon. Now I click open. Now if I click the open key, as you'll see, now there's a little bacon. Now Scratch doesn't have this bacon sprite. This bacon sprite, because I clicked upload from computer, all that did was upload a sprite with the default costume as an image from my computer, whatever image I chose. So the only costume that the sprite has is this image that I uploaded from my computer. And just like all the other sprites, this sprite has a name, an X and Y coordinates, a direction, a size, and a show and hide properties. And then lastly, if I click the paint button when I go to add a new sprite, it'll open up as a blank sprite and it'll automatically put me in this costume editor. Last episode, we learned how to add basic shapes and text in the sprite editor. So if I want, I can make it like this. And I can put some text inside that says happy. Now you can't see this text because it's the same color as the rectangle, but if you try to center it, I give it a black outline, and there you go. Now once again, I wouldn't worry too much about putting the animation code that animates it, and I also wouldn't worry too much about changing these properties over here. When you're working with your sprite, when you're working in Scratch, you're going to be changing all these properties using code blocks. And that's pretty much what all these code blocks do, is change the properties of a sprite to make it do whatever you would like. That's all for this episode, and before I go over what I want you to see if you can do at home for this episode, I want to know if you were able to do what I asked you to do at home in the last episode. So that's all. Now, for this episode's challenges, I want you to see if you can do two things. I want to see if you can upload an image, if you can upload a sprite with any image from your computer. And I want to see if you can find your favorite animal in the Sprite menu and upload that as a Sprite. That's all for this episode. Thanks for watching the Friday episode of the 1 Week of Scratch Beginner series. Hope it was useful, and I hope you learned something. Bye!